I need more. Enter it into me from back.
My mother's voice echoed through the house, cutting through the stillness of the evening. I heard her words from my room, where I had been sitting in silence, pretending not to listen. Her tone was urgent, filled with an unspoken longing that stirred something deep within me. I could feel the weight of her emotions even from behind the closed door, the tremor in her voice lingering in the air like the last note of a forgotten melody. I stood, hesitant at first, but then something pulled me towards her, a force I couldn't name. The night outside was thick, the heavy scent of jasmine and summer heat pressing in through the open windows. But inside the house, there was only tension, an invisible thread connecting us both. As I approached the hallway, her shadow flickered on the wall, and I could see her pacing, her hands trembling slightly as they clenched and unclenched. She was waiting, and whatever she wanted, it was something more than words could offer. I stopped at the doorway, heart racing, and called out softly, "Mom, what's wrong?" She turned, her eyes wide and full of something I couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or maybe desire. Her face, usually so composed, was flushed, as though she had been running, though I knew she hadn't. "I told you I need more," she said again, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "Please, come closer." There was something magnetic in the way she looked at me, something that made it impossible to resist. I stepped closer, drawn by the intensity of her gaze, the way her breath caught in her throat as I approached. The air between us felt electric, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. Every inch I moved seemed to pull us tighter into a web of unspoken feelings, forbidden thoughts lingering in the space between us. After my father left for his business trip, things began to change. At first it was subtle, the way my stepmom's gaze lingered on me for just a second too long, or the way her voice softened when she spoke to me, like she was trying to close a distance between us that wasn't there before. I brushed it off, thinking it was my imagination. But then, slowly, her attention became more intense. The innocent smiles turned into something else, something that made me uncomfortable. She started finding excuses to be near me, offering to help with things I didn't need help with, or sitting too close when we watched TV. The way her fingers would graze mine seemed accidental at first, but over time, I realized it wasn't. I didn't like it, not at all. She wasn't supposed to look at me like that or touch me in ways that made my skin crawl. I avoided her when I could, made excuses to leave the house, anything to get away from the uncomfortable tension building between us. But tonight was different. The house was quiet, too quiet. I could feel the weight of her presence before I even saw her, and when I walked into the living room, there she was, standing by the window, her back to me. She didn't turn around right away, but I knew she had heard me come in. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but deliberate, as if she'd been rehearsing the words. "I need more, you know," she said, turning to face me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, there was no pretense, no hiding behind fake smiles or half-hearted excuses. "What do you mean?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew. She stepped closer, her gaze never wavering. "I need more interest from you. I need you to look at me the way a man looks at a woman." Her voice was steady, but there was a rawness to it, an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I want you to be mine," she whispered, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. I froze, the weight of her words sinking into my chest like a stone. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore, and the truth of her intentions hit me harder than I had expected. Her hand lingered on my arm, her fingers light but deliberate, as though she was testing the boundaries of what she could take. My breath caught in my throat, my mind racing to process what she had just said. "Be yours?" The words felt foreign in my mouth, as if I had spoken to them in someone else's voice. My stepmom nodded slowly, her eyes flickering with an emotion that I couldn't quite place. Desire, desperation, maybe both. "Yes," she whispered, stepping closer still until the space between us was almost gone. "Your father isn't here, and I've been waiting for so long. I need more than just your attention, more than you hiding from me. I want you to look at me as someone who wants you." Her voice was heavy with longing, and the way she said it, so sure and steady, sent a chill down my spine. I tried to pull away, to step back, but she moved in sync with me, her presence overwhelming like a wave crashing against me. "You don't have to fight it," she said, her voice now soft and coaxing, like she was trying to soothe me. "I've seen the way you've been looking at me too." I shook my head, the tension building inside me threatening to break. "No, you're wrong." My voice was shaky, filled with a panic that was rising in my chest. "This isn't right. You're married to my father." Her expression hardened, though her eyes still held that same intensity. "He's not here," she said, her tone almost dismissive. "And besides, He doesn't need to know. This can stay between us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like the woman standing in front of me was a stranger, not the same person who had once married my father and become part of our family. I took another step back, my heart pounding. I can't do this. I won't, I managed to say. My voice more forceful now, but she didn't back down. Instead, she reached out again, this time gripping my hand, pulling me closer. "Why are you so afraid?" she asked, her voice softening again, as though trying to lull me into compliance. "There's nothing wrong with wanting me, with letting yourself feel what you've been holding back." She was closer now, her breath warm on my skin. "I can give you everything you've ever wanted. All you have to do is let me." My body tensed, every fiber of my being screaming to get out of this situation. But my feet felt glued to the ground. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, and the weight of her words pressed down on me like a heavy stone. "No," I said again, my voice steadier this time, pulling my hand free from hers. "I'm not doing this. I'm not betraying my father." For a moment, she stared at me, her eyes wide and unreadable, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Then, slowly, her expression shifted. Disappointment, anger, maybe even a hint of sadness. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low and dangerous now. "You'll regret this." I shook my head, taking a final step back, putting distance between us. "Maybe," I said, my chest tightening, but not as much as I would if I crossed that line. The room felt suffocating, the air heavy with the weight of what had just happened. As I turned to leave, I could feel her eyes on me, watching, calculating, and I knew this wasn't over. As I stepped back, the tension in the room crackled like electricity. My stepmom's expression shifted from desire to frustration, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of something deeper, a vulnerability that contradicted the heat of her earlier words. "You don't understand what you're denying," she said, her voice now a sultry whisper that wrapped around me like silk. "This isn't just a passing thought, it's something real, something you can't ignore." Her eyes darkened with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to look away, to break the connection, but something in her gaze held me captive. "What do you mean?" I found myself asking, despite every instinct telling me to run. "The nights are long and lonely, and I've been left here with thoughts that I can't push away. It's not just about you and me. It's about a need that has grown too strong to ignore," she said, taking a step forward, closing the distance between us. The way she spoke was hypnotic, her voice weaving a spell that made it hard to breathe. I could feel the heat radiating off her skin, and the space between us felt charged, as if the air itself was alive with unspoken promises. "I can show you things you've never felt before," she continued, her breath ghosting across my skin, each word laced with an invitation I couldn't quite refuse. "Things that would make you forget all your fears." "You don't mean that," I managed to say, though my voice wavered, betraying my uncertainty. The temptation was there, swirling around us like a thick fog, pulling me in. "Oh, but I do," she replied, her eyes glinting with a fierce passion. "You think I'm just your father's wife, but I'm so much more than that. I've watched you grow, and I've seen the man you're becoming. You can't deny that you feel something too." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words caught in my throat as she stepped closer, her presence enveloping me. I could feel the heat of her body against mine, the warmth radiating from her as she reached out to brush a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're scared," she said softly, her voice low and intoxicating, "but think about what you really want. You're at an age where desire is a fire that can't be snuffed out." Her touch lingered, sending a rush of adrenaline through me. I wanted to pull away, to remind her of the boundaries, but there was a wild part of me that was intrigued, that wanted to explore the depths of what she was suggesting. "You don't have to fight it," she whispered, her lips barely an inch from mine, her breath mingling with the air between us. "Just let go." In that moment, everything I thought I knew shattered. The world outside faded away, leaving only the two of us, tangled in this web of tension and desire. My voice faltered as her gaze bore into mine, fierce and unyielding. I was caught between what I knew was right and the magnetic pull of what she offered. Her lips curled into a seductive smile. "Just one kiss," she breathed, "and you'll understand everything." As she leaned in, I felt the fire ignite within me, the conflicting emotions battling for control. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the moment, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. "Just one kiss," I repeated silently. the words echoing in my mind as the world blurred around us. And in that heartbeat, I felt the weight of the decision hang heavy in the air. Let's bring this to a close with a powerful and thought-provoking ending. I'll maintain the tension and emotional complexity, while ensuring the resolution feels satisfying. Her lips hovered just above mine, the air thick with anticipation. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last, drowning out the logical voice in my head that screamed for me to stop. Every fiber of my being felt like it was on fire, torn between the magnetic pull of her desire and the moral lines I knew I was dangerously close to crossing. I opened my eyes just as her lips brushed mine, light as a whisper. The moment hung in the air like the calm before a storm. But in that fraction of a second, reality crashed back down on me. I pulled away, my breath ragged, my mind racing. "No," I whispered, stepping back, the word coming out with more force than I intended. "This isn't right." Her face froze, the sultry smile slipping away, replaced by something darker: disappointment, frustration, perhaps even anger. She stepped back, her expression hardening, her eyes narrowing into a dangerous glint. "You can't just walk away," she said, her voice low and icy now, no longer sweet and tempting. "After everything I've shown you, everything I've given you." I shook my head, my chest tight. "It doesn't matter. You're my father's wife. Whatever this is, whatever you've been trying to make me feel, it's wrong." Her jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out, her eyes burning with a fury I hadn't seen before. But then, just as quickly as it came, the fire in her eyes dimmed. She let out a soft, bitter laugh. "You think you're being noble, don't you?" she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Turning me down like you're some kind of hero." She took another step back, folding her arms across her chest, the air between us cooling in an instant. "But you'll regret this. I promise you that." There was an unmistakable threat in her words, but I stood my ground, my fists clenching at my sides. "Maybe I will," I said, my voice steady now, stronger. "But I'd regret it even more if I betrayed my father." Her gaze lingered on me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine as if trying to find a crack in my resolve. But there was none left. I had made my choice, and I knew, deep down, that it was the only one I could live with. Finally, she turned away, her shoulders stiff with anger. "You're just like him," she muttered under her breath, barely loud enough for me to hear. "So blind to what you could have had." Without another word, she walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, my heart still racing, my mind swirling with the weight of what had just happened. The door clicked shut behind her, and the house fell into an eerie silence, as if it, too, had been holding its breath. I stood there for a long time, the stillness wrapping around me like a cold blanket. The tension that had been building for days, weeks, months, was gone, replaced by an emptiness that I wasn't sure how to fill. As the hours passed, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same. My relationship with my stepmom, with my father, with myself, it had all changed, irreversibly. I had faced temptation, felt the heat of it burn through me. But in the end, I had walked away. And though the path ahead was uncertain, at least I knew it was my own. Weeks later, my father returned from his trip, blissfully unaware of the storm that had nearly torn his world apart. My stepmother acted as though nothing had happened, her demeanor cool and controlled, as if the fire that had once burned so fiercely between us had never existed. But I could see the cracks in her mask, the way she avoided my gaze, the coldness in her voice when she spoke to me. It was clear she hadn't forgotten, and neither had I. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but underneath the surface, everything had shifted. I was no longer the same person I had been before that night, and neither was she. The secret we shared hung heavy between us, unspoken but ever present. And though I had chosen to walk away, the memory of that moment, of her lips so close to mine, would stay with me, a reminder of the line I had come so close to crossing. In the end, I hadn't lost myself, but I knew, deep down, that I'd lost something else, something that could never be regained, and that I would have to live with.